What's up guys? This episode we are talking about migrating Paperclip to ActiveStorage. Now the reason we're talking about this is because Thoughtbot decided to recently deprecate Paperclip and tell everyone to migrate to ActiveStorage. So first things first here, you're going to need your Rails application upgraded to Rails 5.2 in order to use ActiveStorage. So that's number one, and we're going to be talking about migrating your Amazon S3 bucket to ActiveStorage. So the important thing here is that Paperclip's documentation doesn't really cover everything. I'm not going to really cover everything either, but when you're doing file uploading from a remote store like Amazon S3, it's a lot more complex than handling your local file system. You could just rename and move files on your local disk, but on Amazon S3 you can't quite do that because it's not a regular file system. So we're going to be talking about migrating those files, and what we'll be doing is creating a database migration to actually tell ActiveStorage, here are a bunch of files, and we'll point ActiveStorage to the locations of the Paperclip original files. We won't be able to handle the styles like the other variation sizes, but this will give us the basis so that all of our old files will be able to be regenerated. So any of the smaller thumbnail sizes we can regenerate with ActiveStorage, and that will save us a lot of trouble, and we can have a seamless transition that way. So let's dive into this episode. There's quite a lot to talk about. So I have an application here with users. They have avatars. If we were to open up one of the URLs for these, we can see that it's configured to go to DigitalOcean Spaces. My bucket name is GoRails. The class name or the model name for my upload is users. They have avatars as the file, and then we have the database ID and split into these three sections. And then we have the style name. So this is either original, which is the original file you uploaded, or whatever you name these other styles. So this is the thumbnail cropped to like 100 by 100 pixels. And then we have the file name. That URL entirely maps to our bucket on DigitalOcean Spaces, the exact same as if you used Amazon S3. DigitalOcean Spaces is actually API compatible. So this users folder has an avatars folder and then a 000 folder and so on. And that is a perfect match for this URL. So what Paperclip does is it knows the database ID and it knows the file name, and so then it can go generate that URL on the fly, and then that's what gets added as your image tag on your HTML. Now ActiveStorage actually has this redirect process where it checks the database to make sure that you've actually processed the version, the smaller file, and then it sends you and redirects you over to the bucket once that's been processed. So the setup for ActiveStorage is quite a bit different than the way that Paperclip does things, because ActiveStorage generates these variations on the fly instead of immediately on upload like Paperclip does. So this is a little bit different, and that is part of why the migration can be a little bit complicated. So let's dive into actually migrating this. The first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to need to run Rails ActiveStorage install. You're going to want to, of course, spell that correctly, and then this will go and copy over your migrations into your Rails app. So you can run Rails DB migrate to create these tables, and then we're going to add a fairly long migration that will do a lookup from all of the existing data from the Paperclip records. So those are columns on your users model, but ActiveStorage has two separate tables. They have the attachments table and the blobs table, and that's actually how your attachments get added. So you have these separate tables, and you don't have to add migrations every time that you add a file upload. So it handles things in a different location. So our migration will basically be taking the stuff off of the users table and then putting it into the ActiveStorage tables. So let's take a look at that. With the Paperclip repository, there's a big long migration doc, and they have this migration in here, which I'm going to grab, and we will take and use this as a reference. So let's run Rails generate migration convert to ActiveStorage. That's the name of this migration. So we're going to open this up, and we're going to replace the contents of this file. So that will be the migration that we're using, and I'll post this in the notes below so you can take a look at that. But the first thing that you're going to need to do here is you're going to need to set up either the Postgres blob ID function, or in this case, in this example, I'm using SQLite, so we're going to use that one. So make sure you uncomment the correct one. This one will work for MySQL or MariaDB. So keep that in mind. And then what this basically does is it generates a couple SQL statements that it will insert into ActiveStorage blobs and ActiveStorage attachments. And then we loop through your models and look for any that have an attachment file name. And then we go through and build up those attachment records. So we just loop through every model and create those new records for ActiveStorage. One thing that I do want to mention here is that this will actually fail if you have a record that doesn't have a file upload. So for example, if a user hadn't uploaded their avatar, it will actually fail here because it's nil. And so you can actually say instance.send attachment.exists, and that will basically call, user.avatar.exists. That's the same way of doing this, except we have more generic names and method calls there. And so you can wrap this stuff with this if statement to make sure that it doesn't fail if the user had nil file upload, which is very common. So that's one change that you might want to make here. And then down here at the bottom, we're going to use the file name instead of a UUID for the key. And then we're going to change the checksum here to actually download the remote files, because our files are on Amazon S3 or DigitalOcean Spaces, and we have to download those because we can't just access those files directly. So this is using a file.read, and that doesn't quite work on files hosted somewhere else. This only works on your own server or your own computer that you're running this on. So we're going to download a copy of every file and then run them through the MD5 process, which is going to take a lot of time, potentially, depending on how many files you have, but this is going to make sure that you have the proper checksum and that the file is matching the ActiveStorage functionality, which verifies the checksum. So this is a necessary step to do this process. And once we're all done, this is going to have records that will have the same key as the one that is in ActiveStorage. So the important part here is that we need these keys to actually match the path in ActiveStorage. And unfortunately, it's just not only the file name. It's actually that whole users, avatars, 000000001. So I'm going to be right back, and I'll have some code for us to replace that key, which I'm going to pull out of Paperclip itself. And we're back. So what I've got here is a modified version of the key method, and this is actually going to generate those same URLs that we were talking about in the browser. So what we do is we extract the file name. You already had that. We need the class name, so we need to grab the users. And so what we're building is users avatars slash the ID partition, which was 000000001. Then we want to put in original and then that file name. And that is the URL we're trying to build here. So we pull out the class name, which is the table name, the users. Then we have the attachment, which is actually just avatar, so I'm going to pluralize that. And then we have the ID partition. This line of code I took from the Paperclip interpolations file, which if you look down here, there's the ID partition. And we just grabbed the integer version of that because we are asking the instance for its ID here. So we know it's an integer, and we can then just drop that in. That will generate our 000 string here. Then we can hard code original because we always want to link to the original file that you uploaded so we can reprocess it. And then our file name. And so this should give us ActiveStorage keys that will actually reference those old Paperclip files, and that should work just fine. So let's run this migration and make sure that all of our files continue to work. Notice one thing here, we don't want to include the beginning slash here, because if we did, then you get double slashes in the URL, and you don't want to do that. So we'll leave that class without the beginning slash here. Even though it's kind of like a URL, we don't want that for our keys in ActiveStorage. So we can see here that our ActiveStorage migration has run in 4.5 seconds. This will wildly vary depending on how many files you have and your internet speed, because this is going to run and download those files, of course. So it's going to take some time, and you'll definitely need some free memory to do this depending on how big your file sizes are. So once that is done, we can actually then go and change this to has one attached avatar. And so you might want to deploy this migration first and then make this change, because you're going to need at this point to change all of the URLs in your application. You'll want to be careful though, because you don't want to run this migration before you make this change too long, because you don't want other users uploading files and then you would have missing records. And so you wouldn't want to do that and have missing records. So maybe you want to do this all at once, but this migration will hold up your deployment unless you're on Heroku, where you deploy the code first and then run the migrations. In that case, you're going to want to run the migration first and then deploy your new code. So be careful with this. The steps that you take will be important, but just be aware, whatever system you are using, if the migrations run first, then you have your code restarted. That is the ideal situation. So with this, we need to then go and save our model, and then we need to go to our pages where we reference those images. We need to make those changes because we can no longer use the old style URLs for these. So instead of doing an image tag for current user avatar.url, we just want to point this to current user.avatar. And if you want to do a different size, you're going to have to use variant here. And you can say resize, and in this case, the medium one was 300 by 300 greater than. And the small one was 100 by 100 greater than. So this is effectively the same thing. Let me put them in the same order as what we had before. We had the medium size, and then the thumb size, and then the large one. And I'll also put that class for an image fluid in here. So that's going to be the only change you're going to really need, is that these resizes for the variants are inline in your views instead of predefined in your model. And that is because, of course, ActiveStorage generates those resized variants on the fly. So you can make any changes to these and it will just regenerate the image as soon as it's requested. So we can go back to our application, refresh our page. It will take a second because it is reprocessing those images, but it should be pointing to the locations that we had before. So let's take a second, wait for this to process, and then come right back. And here we go. We have the exact same images and sizes as we did before. And if we were to open up the large one, we'll see that this goes to a slightly different URL than before, but almost the exact same. So rather than having GoRails as part of the URL, it's actually a subdomain this time. And that doesn't matter because the spaces and Amazon S3, I think, handled those both exactly the same. It will look for either location and find the correct bucket. And then afterwards, it matches the exact same URL as we had before. This time, we're of course using original instead of the thumb, and it includes some other information like we want to render this in inline disposition and some other options here, which you don't have to worry about, but those are included by default in ActiveStorage URLs. So if we open up our thumbnail version this time, it's definitely going to be different this time though. So we have variants, users, avatar 0001, original logic.jpg, and then we have this big long string afterwards. So this URL you can see is quite different, and that is because the way that ActiveStorage sets up their keys for their styles. They have this part here, which is variants, the blobs key, and then afterwards they actually encode the options for the size and put that in the URL. It's probably possible that you can modify this migration that we just created here to include the styles and have them automatically generated, but I didn't have time to look into doing that. But it would be really awesome if you could have this set up to actually make your variants reference the other locations, but I'm not sure if that's exactly possible, and that would definitely take some research to figure out. That would save you some time from having to regenerate these smaller sizes or all of the variants that you might have created, and that would definitely save you some work, but for now this is definitely the easiest solution to just get rolling. So now we could stop here if we wanted. This would be just fine. However, we now have duplicates for every style in our bucket. Now that is kind of a problem for expenses because now you're storing duplicates of all of these files. So what I would recommend you do is add this rake task that we're about to talk about to download the original file, re-upload it to the ActiveStorage default location, and then we'll have all of our files and the other sizes in a different location. Then we can eventually delete all of the old Paperclip files, and then everything is in the ActiveStorage standard locations. The benefit of doing that is that you will have everything separated fully from Paperclip, and then you don't have any duplicate files as you go through this, and you can eventually clear out all of the original files. But you want to be absolutely sure that your migration has completed fully before you do that. So this rake task will be helpful for doing that if you want to go the extra distance. If you're not too worried about the extra styles or want to manually go through your bucket and remove those styles with like a script, you could do that as well to get rid of those other styles and just leave the originals. That would be fine, but this is another option for you as well, and one included in a modified version of the migration doc. So let's go pull that up. So here is the rake task, which I'm going to grab, and we're going to make some modifications to it. I'm going to create a file called, let's shrink this down and replace this view. So edit lib tasks ActiveStorage.rake, and we'll put in here ActiveStorage, say migrate, or this could be maybe you want to call this Paperclip migrate. Whatever you want to name it is up to you. It doesn't really matter what file it's in either. But what I want to do is modify this slightly so that we can define things in a more easy to migrate way. So this is hard-coded to these models, and we want to just make this a little bit more generic. So I'm going to go through and replace the word organization with record. That's going to help a lot. We also have this logo as the attachment, and I want to just make that a string that you can change easily. Instead of logo, we want to reference something else. We'll have name field is the symbol, so it will be a symbol where we interpolate the attachment name into it, and then it's underscore file name. This is the name of the column that we're trying to query against. So I'll have that, and we'll just change this to name field is nil. We also want to make sure that anywhere else that we reference this, such as here, we replace this one with the send name field, and then this one for this would send logo content type. We would do attachment content type, and then that would do our send there appropriately. And I'm also going to change this slightly so that it looks nicer and is easier to manage. We also want to go through for any of these. We want to grab send name field here, get rid of that, and make all of these dynamic. So we'll have our file name, extension name for the image, and you'll notice here that this is actually using a different format than what we did in our migration. And so we want to pull up that migration and grab our key function down here at the bottom, because this is the stuff that we actually want to use in this case. So down here, we can go through and do very similar stuff. Let's just paste it after all of that, and then we'll move this in, say URL. Instead of instance, we're going to use record, or we could go through and actually change this to instance, so we use the exact same wording. We don't really care about these old examples too much right now, so we're going to get rid of that, and we're just going to use our version of this. So for here, we need to get rid of record, change it to instance, same thing here and here. And then now we have our file name, which we'll grab from the instance. We'll grab this class, which we don't need to do anymore because we have it referenced up here. We have the ID for the instance, which we need, and the ID partition. And then we get our URL, and we're going to change this to URL. And then we'll also send the attachment to symbol, and that will call the attachment method, which is in this case avatar. Then it will open up with OpenURI. We'll download the file. We'll pass it in as a file object. Then we'll grab the file name from the name field and the content type from there. So as long as we have all of these set up correctly, we can go through and use pretty much the exact same code to do these migrations. And what we're really just doing here is we're saying, hey, go grab the files from the original URLs in our bucket and then download them and re-upload them. That's all this really does. And you'll have to run this, of course, for every one of your models and your files that you have attached. And so the reason that I tried to extract these is that you can either easily change them, or you could modify the rake task to take those as arguments, and you could use that as passed in. So keep that in mind, whichever route you want to go. I'm just going to do this for this example, but you could go extract these out to rake task arguments. So the other thing we need to do here is we need to make this a full URL. So we had before nyc3.digitalocean spaces.com/gorails/ the class name. And so you're going to need the full original URL. In this case, we just needed the local or relative path inside of it for the migration. And so that's the only real difference that you would need to pull this off. So that is the only changes we're going to make to this. This will allow us to do the exact same thing to generate the URLs with the domain and the protocol, and that's going to allow us to then download all of our files and then re-upload them. You will temporarily have duplicates of every single file, of course, as you might have guessed. But the benefit of this is that it's going to go and make a full copy of everything, so you can fully delete that old location, the users folder inside of your bucket, and then be completely away from Paperclip, and everything that you have then, once this is done, is fully ActiveStorage compatible and uses all of their defaults. And before we run this, we want to make sure that we use the table name for the class here. That is important. And then the other thing is you may want to skip if the file name is blank, for example. So you could skip this record. You could also wrap this in a block if you wanted to, or an if statement. And then you should be able to run Rake Paperclip Migrate in your terminal. This may take forever. The guy mentions in the README that it took like 24 hours or something to migrate like 10,000 records or tens of thousands. So it depends on the size of your files, your internet connection, how fast this will run is going to wildly vary. But you'll be able to run this, and this will then go and re-upload all those files, and then everything should be completely separate. And the way to test that is to go back to your Rails application, refresh your page. When the images do show up, if you open up the image in a new tab here, you shouldn't see any of the users' locations at all. You should just see one fairly short set of characters here, and that should be it. And that's going to be the location of the file in DigitalOcean Spaces or Amazon S3 bucket. So if we were to refresh this here, we should see that we have files located here that aren't inside of the folder. And once this does show us that, we should be safe to go and delete this user's folder. Yeah, so here's our PRUML8 blah blah blah, and that matches exactly our new file that we just uploaded. So this folder now, users, should be safely deletable. Don't delete variants. That one actually comes from ActiveStorage and stores all the variations of these original files. So with that said, that is pretty much all that you have to do to make this migration. There's one last thing, is that your validations aren't going to work quite the same, so you'll need to write custom validations, although there is one in Rails 6 that does allow you to validate presence of ActiveStorage uploads. So I'm going to pull that out and extract it to use in Rails 5.2. So here's the pull request for the presence validation for attachments. If we take a look at the code, it's actually 30 lines of tests, and then it's just a simple method that is added to the attached one class. So if we pull this file up, we can look at what the module and class is for this, and then grab that method and then put it inside of, say, an initializer inside of our code. So config initializers, say ActiveStorage.rb. We'll paste this in, we'll get rid of the ones that we're not trying to include, and we'll just simply monkey patch that in. So what this is going to do is when you restart your Rails application, you will now have the blank method available, and then you can say in your models, you can say validates avatar presence is true. Now for the content type validations, you could do something like validate avatar is image, and then just simply create a method, but avatar is image, avatar.image question mark, and that would be it. So then you could just do your errors to add that if it's not. So error.add avatar, it must be an image if it's not an image, for example. So I know this episode ended up being super long, but there's a lot of concerns that you need to have if you're making a migration like this, because all of those files cannot go missing. That would be the worst thing that could possibly happen. So I wanted to make sure that we went through this process and made sure that we made duplicates of files and use that as our safety net, just to make sure that once we're all done with this, that all of our files are now in active storage, and we safely can confirm that, and then we can safely go delete all of those duplicates, because you don't really want to keep those around either. But if that's okay with you, then you could skip that migration, which will save you a lot of time and a lot of effort. So anyways, good luck with your migration if you are upgrading from Paperclip to ActiveStorage. It's going to be a not fun task at all. So best of luck, and if you have any questions, let us know in the comments below, and hopefully we'll be able to help you. Till the next one, I will talk to you guys later. Peace.